Within days, in fact, within a day of the 9/11 attacks, the United States government began to think, what are we going to do to prevent a repeat of this horrific attack? And everyone that I interviewed for this book, and I interviewed most of the people involved in the immediate aftermath of 9/11, they were persuaded that another attack was not only likely, but almost certain, and that the attackers had either come to the United States already and were waiting to launch further attacks, or would come, as had the hijackers, from abroad. And so officials in the Bush administration began to ask themselves, what can we do to prevent a repeat of this attack? And I'm going to tell another story, because in government, as in much of life, we make sense of the world and we decide what to do by the stories we tell ourselves. So this was the story that John Ashcroft, who was the Attorney General at the time, and the people in the Justice Department told themselves about what had happened and how to prevent another attack. And it involves Zia Jarrah, who was the pilot, the hijacker pilot of United Flight 93, which crashed in Shanksville, Pennsylvania, after the passengers heroically stormed the cockpit and forced a crash landing rather than allowing the plane to fly into its intended target, which was the Capitol building in Washington. Well, on September 10th, the day before the attacks, in fact, the night before the attacks, just before midnight, Zia Jarrah was pulled over by a Maryland state trooper driving 95 miles an hour along the I-95, which is the main freeway that runs up and down the east coast of the United States. The trooper pulled him over, walked back to his patrol car, ran the usual wants and warrants, and nothing came up on Zia Jarrah. So he wrote a ticket for $270, handed it to Jarrah. Jarrah went off, and the next day was at the controls of United Flight 93. The ticket was discovered in his belongings after the crash. At the time that he was pulled over by the state trooper, Zia Jarrah was in the United States illegally. He had come here on a student visa, had not attended school, had overstayed the period of time that was on his visa anyway. And what the people in the Justice Department took away from that was, if that state trooper had had at his fingertips information about Zia Jarrah's immigration status, perhaps he would have been held, incarcerated, and deported instead of carrying out the 9/11 attacks. And Jarrah wasn't alone. Two of the other pilots, Hani Hanjour, who flew the plane that crashed into the Pentagon, and Mohammed Atta, who was the ringleader, had both at some period of time been out of status in the United States and had been pulled over for traffic violations. So the conclusion that Ashcroft and the people in the Justice Department drew from that experience was that the best way that we can prevent another terrorist attack is to use our immigration enforcement tools to the fullest. The problem with that is, as all of you in this audience know, there are an awful lot of people living in the United States in an unauthorized capacity or here illegally, something like 12 million. And there are an awful lot of people who travel to the United States every year and have to be vetted to see whether we should allow them to come here either as tourists or as permanent immigrants. So you were dealing with this enormous number of people with the goal of trying to find a tiny handful who are already in the United States or were intending to come to the United States to do us grievous harm.